I think my commitment as a director, varies in between the viewer and the script. But I think kind of in the first instance, the script is always kind of fairly aware of the viewer and needs to be. And although I'm sure there are scripts that are not aware of the viewer, I think they're few and far between, and they're very difficult to get made. And fundamentally, why do you write something, or why do you want to make a film? And it's to show and to share an experience or a feeling or a characters or a world. And so I think right from the very outset, there's a commitment to an audience from a writer or a director or a filmmaker or a producer or whoever it may be. And then of course then you make sacrifices as to how you think you're best going to communicate that idea, even if it's for an audience in the first place. And you do all this preparation and you kind of work it out and you try and make it the best it possibly can be to kind of stay true to the original idea and reach the widest appropriate audience, all up in the pre-production. And then I think actually when you come to shooting it, it all slightly goes out the window, and it actually becomes about what's right in the moment of the truth of the scene and how does it feel. And you suddenly go, because you're working so quickly and you're so up against it, it's suddenly rely on instinct, which is something that I particularly like as a director, because you can throw away all the kind of the really detailed analysis, and even though it's important, it's be there in your subconscious, you can go back to instinct, and it's about, yeah. I think it entirely varies according to the writer and the project, and I've kind of written projects myself, and I've come up with ideas and then worked on them with other writers, and I've also been a director for hire and had nothing to do with the script as well. But I personally, I'm a collaborator, and I think that, and I like working with the writers. I think that's a really good thing, and I really like kind of starting with a writer at the beginning, and feeding into their writing process, and then working with the writer right the way through to the very end, and having them feeding into the shoot where appropriate, and also the editing period as well. So I really like that kind of that collaboration, and that's also the same actually of the HODs. I really look at it as a collaboration where each HOD probably brings to the table a specialisation or a specialised skill that they know far more about than I do, and a much better place to make decisions about the specificity, the specific nature of their tools and their kit and what they're trying to achieve, and then it's my job to work with them to kind of look after the whole film. So if they're looking after their particular department, and I'm looking up, that's not a very good way of phrasing it. I suppose that they're experts in what they're doing specifically, and it's my job to kind of take their ideas and steer their ideas so that they fit with the film as a whole. Well, it sort of depends, doesn't it? And it sort of depends what sort of a filmmaker you are. I believe that if I'm not listening to everybody's ideas, then I'm limiting the potential of the film. But I think there are directors or filmmakers that exist where they have such a single-minded vision that actually there's not really space for other people's ideas, and that results in a different type of film. And of course, neither is right or wrong, but they just kind of produce slightly different results. And certainly, I'm a collaborator rather than an auteur, and I find that more exciting for me. Knowing you're going to go into an edit, you want to give yourself as many options as possible. Well, I suppose that's what I started off doing, giving myself as many options as possible, so that if you get into trouble, that you can get out of trouble. And if you decide you want to cut a line, then you are able to cut a line. But actually, increasingly, I'm finding that actually what that sometimes does is that you don't take the same risks. If you have an option, then often you'll take the safe option. And so as I'm kind of, I hope, maturing as a filmmaker, I'm now finding that actually, if I shoot a scene in one shot, then I have no options in the edit. And if it's my instinct from the beginning to do that, then I should probably go with that instinct. And yes, that will inevitably result in problems, but it certainly means that you won't have someone coming in and telling you you need to cut a scene, or cut a line, or approach it from a different angle, and be that an executive, or be it yourself in a moment of self-doubt, or and so I think that's an equally interesting way of approaching it, and actually I think it's something that I want to do more of. Not necessarily shooting it in one shot, but being confident of my original instincts and shooting it for as I imagine it, rather than giving myself as many options as possible. Usually what will happen is I think I would plan a scene by, uh, usually I would plan a scene by reading the script a few times, lots of times in fact, really getting it into my head, and then start planning it and storyboarding it. And I usually plan it in quite meticulous detail, partly because that's useful in kind of shot planning, but it's also quite useful in terms of really analysing the script in really minute detail. And that kind of process forces me to, I suppose, think more outside the box about how I approach a scene, and then when we get to set, then that tends to go out the window because the light's different, or because we couldn't get a prop, or because everything's in a slightly different position and we can't get a crane in where we were hoping to get it in, or whatever it may be. And so then you have to, but because you've got that, because you know the script so well, and because you know what you want to achieve with the scene, that actually, and you've got all that kind of stuff in the back of your mind, actually that gives you the ability to make decisions quickly about how best the scene will work. I think it's a little bit like an actor learning their lines so well that actually they don't need to think about it anymore. And then if suddenly something goes wrong, the forefront of their mind is able to improvise around it, because they don't need to worry about what their next line is, because it's there embedded in the subconscious.